driveway, and I keep getting herbicide drift. They shouldn't even have that stuff on the market. That's my opinion.
Where do you know where it's coming from, or?
Well, it's
just
to
the
put people's lawns, I guess. You know, I didn't realize the granular can do the same thing,
I guess I didn't either.
you know, when it dissolves and all that.
Hey,
kind of
Benny.
stuff. Yeah.
Congratulations.
So have you been up to the new?
3 down, 3 more to go, right?
Yes, I have.
Have
I've been helping them out a little bit out there, moving some stuff.
Where do I need to go when I get up there?
Let's see, it would be,
I'm up near the university, U Street, Vine Street. I'm near there. So how do I get up
Adams Street. Adams Street.
there? Oh, I have to go down to Adams to get.
Are we live,
go
Linda?
out east. Oh, is it right on
Okay.
Adams Street then?
Well, we'll go ahead and get started. We might have a few more people coming in. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Broman. I'm the
Oh,
Executive
they'll have
Director
time probably.
of Wachiska Audubon. We're an independent chapter of the National Audubon with 17 counties in southeast Nebraska. You can follow us on our website and our Facebook. We're going to try to be more active in those social medias in the near future. We've completed our move out to Prairie Pines, and so if you haven't been out to visit us, be sure and come out sometime. We're at 3100 North 112th, so it's at 112th and Adams. So only the last 50 yards is gravel. Otherwise, you've got paved Adams Street all the way out to the almost right to the gate, and they're open on to the public for free on Fridays and Saturdays 9 to 5, and then Sunday afternoons 1 to 5. And if you're coming out, give me a call. You can come out to see me. I'm out there, and then we're also Wendy, who was signing people in at the front. She's our new office manager, Wendy Bantam, and she's going to be working Monday and Tuesdays. So Monday and Tuesdays, you've got a really good shot of one or both of us being out there. But then Friday and Saturday, for sure, the gates are open, and you can come out and access the property. Have a couple things coming up. One thing I'll mention that was last weekend was on Saturday. We had Return of the Thunderbirds. It was a little windy and a little cold, but I think they had a little over 300 people out there at Return of the Thunderbirds. So that was a good celebration with the Native Americans to celebrate the rains and the thunder and spring, basically. Coming up on Saturday, April 19th, we've got a booth at Earth Day Lincoln, which is at Innovation Park, which is the old fairgrounds. And then also, and that's from 10 to 2. And then from 1 to 4 at Prairie Pines, they're having an Earth Day celebration. So we'll have a booth there also. So we didn't know that they had that one, so we'd already scheduled the Lincoln one. But in the future, they're going to try to pick different dates. But anyway, again, that's Lincoln Earth Day, Saturday the 19th from 10 to 2, and then at Prairie Pines from 1 to 4. So there's a little bit of overlap there. And then Sunday, April 27th from 11 to 2, we'll have a booth at Arbor Day at Antelope Park. So we'll have an Arbor Day celebration there. We do have a couple suet cakes from our orders, and we did have a couple extra bags of seed, which we were notifying a couple people, but we brought some suet tonight, so if you're interested in getting some suet, if you got some, especially woodpeckers that have been coming around your feeders, we've got suet blocks out there for $2 each at the front table. I'm going to see, I think, Teresa, you might be the only board member here tonight. Yeah, so as far as board members, so Teresa Pella is our president. So I know today Ethan and, yes, well, I know Tom Lynch, Dakota, and Ethan were all three at the conference this afternoon. I just rushed over from that. The Great Plains Conference was the last 2 days on Innovation Campus. So, but thank you for your service, Teresa. So if you have any questions or comments or want to talk to a board member or the president, you can grab Teresa tonight. We'll take a couple of minutes and see if anybody has any unusual bird sightings. Did anybody have they had anything unusual? Yes. Two flickers tearing apart your. You better buy some of that suet out there tonight. We have at the front table. Maybe they'll get into the suet. So yeah, a couple of flickers. Yes.
I have a crow that keeps visiting my bird bath, bringing bread. People should not be feeding birds bread.
It's just bringing chunks of bread to your bird bath.
He brought a bagel one day.
Yeah. Well, maybe they'll start bringing. They claim that they like shiny things, so maybe they'll start picking up some coins and bringing some coins or something. So okay, Bertha. Anybody else have anything they want to report? Yes.
I've got wood ducks on my crib.
Wood ducks. Have you got any boxes out for them, or do you have some hollow trees? You got some boxes? Okay. Well, hopefully they'll nest for you. You'll have some little guys. There's nothing prettier than a male wood duck, that's for sure. Anything else? Yes, Jeff.
Oh, we had a pair of tom turkeys battling for territory in behind our Well, we live on the east edge of town, out by Southeast Community College. And so
Okay.
They were going at each other.
They're getting after it, huh? It's that time of year. Yeah, I know turkey
I've
season's
never
up.
witnessed that before. They had
Well,
their claws or their beaks locked together and their necks were twisting around.
my.
Okay, they were serious.
You don't want to get in? Yeah.
Yes. Anything else? I do want to wish a happy birthday to one of our longtime members. We've got she celebrated her 90th birthday this last weekend, and so I want Rosemary Thornton's with us tonight. So Rosemary, happy birthday. She's a longtime member. So just as a reminder, tonight's presentation and past presentations are available on YouTube, and we're trying to get them so that they're on our website too, because the last 2 years have only been on YouTube, but we're going to try to get them so that they're on our page also. So with that, it's my pleasure tonight to introduce tonight's presenter, Dr. Deb Bathke, and she was the lead author of the state's 2014 Climate Change Impact Assessment, Understanding and Assessing Climate Change Implications for Nebraska. Before working at UNL, she served as the assistant state climatologist for New Mexico, originally from Ponca, so she's a native. She has her master's and BS, or undergraduate, from the University of Nebraska, and a PhD in atmospheric sciences from Ohio State. But we won't hold that against her. But so Dr. Bathke, thanks for coming, and I'll turn it over to you. We'll take questions after the presentation. So.
Thank you. I'm going to see if I can get all this to work. Thank you for whoa, that's loud. Thank you for having me tonight. I really appreciate coming here. This is my first time being in this church, even though I have several friends who are members here. Just tonight, what I'm going to be talking about a little bit is just a little bit about me, about this Nebraska State Climate Office and what we do, and then if we get to it, some of our future plans, though they're not looking too promising these days, but we'll talk about them a little bit. So, as the introduction said, I grew up in Ponca, Nebraska. We moved there when I think I was 3 years old. You can see I had a just outgoing personality from a very young age, just excited to talk to people. My mom asked me why I didn't smile in that picture, and I apparently told her it's because I didn't like the guy. But there's some pictures from Ponca. Looking at the bluffs over the river, you know, the land of Lewis and Clark. I grew up fascinated with the stories, read all the books about all the explorers. I was either looking at the rocks or looking up at the sky, so I knew that I'd go into something in earth science someday. And I came to UNL for my undergraduate, never even thought about graduate school till a professor approached me and asked me if I wanted to work for him. And I was like, I can get paid doing this? So I'm going on my 31st year of being paid to work in climate sciences. So I know in one of the announcements when I took the state climatologist position, she has decades of experience. And I'm like, wait, what? And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it kind of is decades. Oops, did I lose it?
It's okay. No, it was me.
Oh, okay, I thought it was me, maybe. So after I finished my master's degree, I went to, and you forgot the Ohio State University. And I did ice core paleoclimatology in my master's degree too. But when I went to Ohio State, I actually worked in the ice core lab at Ohio State. And so that's a picture of the ice core. You can see, given how that looks, that's probably from one of the tropical locations. But you can see the layers of dust, the seasonal layers of dust in that. The polar ice cores, the dust isn't as visible. You can tell when you would analyze them, and when you would hit the Dust Bowl era, you could tell because the dust would just, the counter would just go crazy. Or when you hit a volcanic eruption. But you could tell from the other chemical properties, the seasonal variation as well. I often call myself kind of a jack of all trades with weather and climate, because I've done everything from analyze the chemical and dust analysis of ice cores to, there's some pictures there. I was fortunate enough to go back to Ohio State. This is pre-COVID. That's how my world is these days, pre and post-COVID. So this was pre-COVID, and I took my son at the time. This is my friend Mary. We worked together there. She's retired now. She's pointing to the freezer, which is behind her with all the ice cores in, that it was about minus 25 degrees is what we kept the freezer at. And we would go outside in the winter to warm up because it was so cold in there. And when you're working with the ice cores, you couldn't have gloves on, you just had rubber gloves. And so you would know if the saw got too close because you would hear it. You wouldn't necessarily feel it on your fingers, but you would hear it on the glove first. And then that's one of the drills to drill the ice cores. That would either be, depending if it was a polar region, would be on a plane and land on the ice sheet. If it was in a tropical location, it would be hauled up by Sherpas usually. And then after graduate school, I took my first job, and that was at New Mexico State University, so a spitting distance from the Mexico border, so very different from the Midwest. When I first got there for the job interview, I was like, you grow crops here? Like, what the? How do you have ag here? This is like dirt and rocks. And so it's very different. I went from studying ice cores to studying drought because I started in 2005, which was kind of at the tail end of the big early 2000s drought that Nebraska was affected by as well. And so I got started in the drought world there. Worked a lot with the state government. Bill Richardson was governor at the time. Worked a lot with extension and agriculture, and they were all about the pecans, the chili peppers, and the onions there. So a little bit different. And I loved having weather, like right today was winter weather. I loved that. I did not miss winter when I wanted to see it. I could go to Santa Fe and see the snow. Swore I would never move back to Nebraska. Met my husband. His job's in Nebraska. And so I ended up coming full circle back to Nebraska. I worked with the National Drought Mitigation Center since 2008. I also taught courses in the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences and the School of Natural Resources. Was really fortunate in that position. I did lots of outreach events. The bottom picture was, that says Jordan. So I went to Jordan a couple of different times for workshops that were, and things, drought early warning systems, drought programs funded through the USAID. That doesn't exist anymore for now, but we did a lot of work in the Middle East, North Africa region, and also some work in Ethiopia was another couple of places that I've been to. Worked with students a lot, and then I took the interim position, and it feels like forever. I took the interim position in December of 2023 and did that until last July, and then I became full-time. So that was a part-time basis, and then full-time state climatologist in July of 2024. So that's a little bit about me. The state climate office we're fortunate. It's not a solo endeavor like in some states. The state climatologist may be like 10% of someone's time, and that's it. That's all they have to devote to it. We're really fortunate here in Nebraska that we have 3 full-time faculty funded to be in the state climate office. So there's me, the state climatologist. There's Dr. Ruben Benke, who's the mesonet manager for the weather stations, the state university-operated systems of weather stations across the state. And then Dr. Eric Hunt, who's our extension climatologist for agriculture and climate resilience. And the 3 of us work together and Ruben's pretty busy with the mesonet because they've got funding and lots of new stations. Eric and I tag team most other things, especially this time of year when it's field season and they're out installing stations. What do we do? How many people have heard of the state climate office before? Okay, this is higher than most audiences that I talk to, so this is good. I'm very happy. So we study weather and climate data. I keep forgetting there's a screen back there. And we do it to help Nebraskans prepare for and respond to climate change and climate impacts and different climate extremes. And we do that through monitoring the climate, collecting observations, analyzing those observations, through providing climate services, and I'll talk about that a little bit, and then through some of our research and engagement. You guys are probably pretty knowledgeable here, but I always like to start with this, what's the difference between weather and climate? Because not everybody knows that. And we often say, Climate is what you expect, weather is what you get. So, and in Nebraska, that can be anything. The other way I like to talk about it with kids is weather tells you what to wear each day. So the weather today, I'm kind of cool, so I have a jacket on. 2012, when my son was born, the same time of year, it was like 90 degrees. So, again, it's what you expect, what you get. And climate is the whole range of clothes you have in your closet. So here in Nebraska, I have everything from shorts and tank tops and swimsuits to snow pants, full face mask, hats, gloves, the whole works. So that's very different than, and once I moved to New Mexico, I got rid of all that cold weather stuff. Like this was about as cold as I would dress for. So I like to think of it that way. So it's not just, some people think of it, climate as the average climate, but it's really not just the average, it's those extremes as well. We are ready for the extremes here. Maybe not ready, but we know we're gonna get the extremes here. On a day like today, my mother-in-law from Austin, Texas would be wearing the parka and the gloves and the hat. Because they're already getting the warm weather there. I need a drink because I don't think I breathe when I talk. So some of our efforts in the State Climate Office, we do a lot of different things, and I'll talk about these. We try and get out in the community. I'll talk about some of our research projects and our efforts. Maybe. So I'll start with monitoring. The Nebraska Mesonet, we have a brand new webpage that just went up a few months ago. It used to be mesonet.unl.edu, now it's nemesonet.unl.edu. And Ruben's been working really hard, has been getting millions of dollars to upgrade the weather station network across the state, at least the state-owned ones, not the National Weather Service ones, but the university-owned ones. And these are really important for climate monitoring. They have data that you don't get from the National Weather Service. So it's typical with the National Weather Service, you get air temperature, dew point temperature, wind speed, things like that. But with these stations that are more towards climate monitoring, we have things like soil moisture and soil temperature, bare soil temperature, solar radiation to help us calculate evapotranspiration for irrigation scheduling in crops. They've got cameras installed on them so that we can see what the conditions look like. Lots of different information on them. The goal, this is the number of stations where we might have a couple more right now so you can see where the stations are. If you think of National Weather Service station, there's only a handful of those. So in Lincoln, it's out at the airport, and what the temperature there or the rainfall there is completely different. Like the last rainfall we had, I think the Weather Service had 0.2 inches, and my weather station at my house showed 0.9 inches. So, I mean, you get that big variation. And so if you think of that, if the next one over is not till Omaha, there could be lots of variation there. And so one of the things with the Mesonet network is we're trying to get at least one station per county. This is showing from one of those really cold spells that we had. And I'm gonna see if I can get this to work. So right here, minus 22, that was the lowest temperature in the state, and that was recorded at a Mesonet site. So if we didn't have the Nebraska Mesonet, we wouldn't have known how cold it really got in Nebraska, because the other closest Weather Service site would be North Platte there. So the real-time data, you can get it on our page. The National Weather Service does ingest this data, and they use it. Like when we had the big windstorm, it helps them get more data points, more rainfall points, things like that when they're monitoring to see what a storm is going to do. Oops, I didn't have it. I had I think we have, I had the wrong slide. So I think we have 60 some sites right now. The goal is to get an additional 30, I think, installed this year, assuming the weather cooperates, and probably about that many more the following year. So some really ambitious plans there. The grants that Ruben has been getting, they have funding until 2028 or 2029, we do have an effort with a proposal with the state legislature to try and get some state money to help with the operating costs of that. So that's the issue with every state mesonet has ever faced, is it's easy to get the money to put them in. It's harder to get that maintenance money. Some of them are privately sponsored, public, like not Department of Natural Resources. The Natural Resource District sponsors some. There are others, some private ones that are sponsored as well for the maintenance, and some that we do through, if we get a grant for something, we get a little bit of return on that we then use to put back into the stations as well. That wasn't supposed to be in there, but look, that's, so for monitoring, we don't just use the data we collect, we use data from everywhere. In the United States, there's no National Climate Service, and so a bunch of different agencies collect data for their own specific purposes. Like the USGS collects stream flow data. Well, we use that for drought monitoring, which is part of climate. The National Weather Service, I have a weather balloon up there. I have one in my car. I brought it in, I was going to show it to you, was going to bring it in and show it to you, and I left it in my car. So if you want to see it afterwards, I'll run out and get it quick. And that's what the weather station looks like out at the airport, an automated surface observing system. This is the radar dome. There are buoys that we use for ocean temperatures, which matter when we're looking at El Nino versus La Nina, and that in turn how that affects us here in Nebraska. So it's all connected. We look at data from not just our mesonet, from other mesonets as well. For monitoring, one of the things that we do up until this year, I was an author for the U.S. Drought Monitor, the national map. You may have seen it on the Weather Channel, the local news. I think the local news is doing a story tonight on it. Eric sent me a text right before I got up here that I can't remember if it was 1011 that was doing it with drought, but we provide information to the U.S. Drought Monitor. I'm not allowed to be an author anymore because I now represent a state. Authors have to come from regional or national centers. So it's fine by me because that was like the worst 3 days. Well, I guess it's 3-day shifts 6 times a year. So the worst 18 days of my life were 40 hours crammed into 3 days, in a week, trying to get that map done on that time scale. And to do this map, we look at probably 150 or more different maps that we layer in a geographic information system on our computer and try and interpret at different time scales to come up with one picture of what drought looks like. And so we provide the on-the-ground input for that, Eric and I do. And this is the map that came out today. So I think it stayed the same from last week. Eric and I talked about it, decided that the rain that we had wasn't quite enough to warrant any additional improvements yet. So we're still kind of sitting at that abnormal dryness to moderate drought in this part of Nebraska here. We'll see. Once the temperature cranks up, we'll see what happens. And that's kind of what we're waiting for right now, is to see what happens as that springtime warmth starts in. We also look at the Climate Prediction Center outlook. So this is showing what's expected for March. You'll notice in Nebraska, there's this big equal chances. They used to label it just EC. We would call that equally clueless, just to tease our buddies with. But it's really hard to do because we're so far away from the oceans here, and the jet stream goes right over us in Nebraska. And so the rainfall and the temperature that we're going to get associated with the El Nino versus La Nina depends on what side of that jet stream you're on. And we're typically kind of right on that boundary between it. And so there's no clear signal that we can look at from past events to tell us, to give us an indication. Typically with La Nina, especially if it's a multi-year, we tend to get drought here in Nebraska. I can't think we're just starting back into a La Nina. I can't remember. I didn't look at it this week, the indices to see. But when we think of the big droughts from Nebraska's history, like the the Dust Bowl, or you think of even the 2012 drought. Those followed multi-year La Nina events. So we do know if they're big, strong events that we do get a signal here in Nebraska. But right now, equal chances, it means could be above normal, could be below normal. And that's kind of what we expect in Nebraska, right? And then for the seasonal, looks like drier than normal in the western 2/3 of the state. Some of that's based on the trend, how things have been trending. Some of that's based on that El Nino, La Nina signal. And we look at those, and then if there is a strong signal, we try, and particularly Eric, going out and talking with producers about what are the implications for that for agriculture. What does a warmer, drier season look like for you? What does that mean for agriculture? Other climate services that we have, we take that information and that analysis and we use it to provide information to people in our state. And we have a lot of this information on our website. We're in the process of updating it. Our recent update, it's not done, still in progress, made it easier for us to add articles without having to actually go in and do have Mark, where's Mark's mom? Mark Resources, without having Mark code everything for us, we can just go in and add them ourselves. And so we have articles up there like, let's see, the soil temperature and moisture update. Did we get a 100-degree flip that 1 week from the minus 30s below to 60s? And yes, we did in the western part of the state. So we try and put something up at least weekly in terms of what's happening with weather and what's happening with climate. And you can find all of that on our website, or you can email me and I can point you to it. It's nsco.unl.edu under articles. There's lots of great information there. So this was one of the recent ones, was the 100-degree swing. Did we hit that 100-degree swing in a week time? And there were stations, particularly in this part of the state that hit that 100-degree. I think we didn't quite make it in Lincoln. So I think we're probably about at 80-some degree swing, but so like North Platte had a 101-degree, Gothenburg had a 104-degree swing just in a number of days. So that's Nebraska. That's what, I guess that's the climate. That's what you can expect in Nebraska, right? No. So much fun. For climate services, we also serve on a number of committees. One is the state's Nebraska Climate Assessment and Response Committee. Right now, I think they meet just twice a year. Unless drought is getting really bad, then they'll increase the frequency of those meetings. Who belongs on that? Let's see, we've got from the university, we've got the State Climate Office, the National Drought Mitigation Center, the Conservation and Survey Division, Cooperative Extension, and then at the state level, Department of Natural Resources, the federal level, the USGS, the National Weather Service, the NRCS, and the alphabet soup at the federal level. We'll see how much of that is able to continue. We had a meeting with the National Weather Service folks from Hastings came to visit us and talked about it, and just seeing what our plans were and how we could continue and what we could continue and what may happen moving forward. We also work with regional groups. So we have the Missouri River Basin Drought Early Warning System, and we have calls and talk about drought conditions and coordination across state boundaries that way and how we represent what drought looks like. And then we have the regional climate. It's the four below us, the High Plains Regional Climate Center. So in the US, at least currently, there are state climate offices that are funded, not federally at all. They were funded federally through the National Weather Service up until 1973, I think. And then at that time, that program went away. And states appointed people as state climatologists. So Nebraska didn't have an office until 2016 for an actual state climate office. And then at the regional level, there's the High Plains Regional Climate Center. All those states, it's the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, and then eastern Colorado and eastern Wyoming. They're and western Colorado and Wyoming are in the west. And then at the national level, there's the National Centers for Environmental Information. So it's kind of a three-tiered approach to climate services. In terms of research, this is one of the projects we have. It's called Rural Confluence. It spans sort of spans the Mississippi River Basin. The 3 states involved in it are Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, so 3 different parts of the basin. We were supposed to be working in 2 communities. Our first community was Niobrara. For those of you who don't know, Niobrara has been moved twice in the past due to flooding. And after this last flood that they had in 2019, they're looking at issues like their water treatment facility is going to need to move because it's right there next to the river. And so part of this project, we were looking at modeling data, talking with them about their economic plans and things like that. We brought different federal agencies together, university groups. There's 2 engineering classes working with the community to do some of that preliminary work on how you would go about moving this to make it cheaper for the community in the long run, because normally you have to hire consulting firms for that. So by having students do some of the preliminary work, that helps out the community. We have 2 students from Niobrara. They're not UNL students. One goes to Northeast Community College. One goes to University of South Dakota, but they're from Niobrara. And so they're in there working with the community, talking with the community, writing grants. They got some grants for some weather radios and signs, and some grants to plant trees and increase green space to help make their community more resilient. They did one of the things they found after the 2019 flood is that when they were applying for the FEMA relief funds, they needed before pictures of the infrastructure. And they didn't have those catalogs, so they were like going through people's phones and looking at background photos. So the students went out and took a photo inventory of all of the town, like infrastructure and assets. And then what they're in the process of doing, I think they just finished it, was surveying the residents of the community in terms of capacity. Like, if this happens again, what is your personal capacity to be able to help in terms of stacking sandbags and things like that. And they talked about how the high school students were really helpful in that and how they coordinated. So that's what we're doing right now, is kind of learning from the past so that we can prepare for the future. This grant did make the Ted Cruz list of woke grants, so we're not real confident it will continue. We haven't got a stop work order yet, but we're not sure. But since we're on that list, I kind of see it as the writings on the wall, but I don't know. Because it has climate change in it. And we talked about part of this grant is broadening participation in STEM fields, so getting rural kids interested in science and things, and getting them to work within their communities and showing them that there's a future in your small town and there are ways that you can be involved in things like that. So we don't know if this will continue. My guess is probably through the end of the fiscal year, but I don't know for sure. I haven't heard anything. Another one we have is working with producers across the Midwest to envision what agriculture might look like under climate change. Probably also going to get, we haven't had a stop work order yet, but we're not real confident that this work will continue. But it's been interesting. We've learned a lot so far by going out and talking to producers and doing different scenario types of activities. We have a game that's called Impact Squared State Fair, where they get a budget from the federal government to implement climate smart practices. And what would you do? And if you had this amount of land, like if you could start from scratch and you had this amount of money, what would you do to it to make yourself climate resilient? And then they get a ribbon if it stands up to our toss of the dice in terms of what's going to happen with the climate. For engagement, this is just from last year and this year to where we've been so far. Blue is where we've been so far this year. So we try and get out, Eric and I, to talk to people across the state. So I've been to Holdridge and Kearney and Hastings and Nebraska City, here in Lincoln. Eric went up to Norfolk. I guess I went up to Plattsmouth as well. We're trying to put this together really quick this afternoon to see if we got everything. So we're hoping to get out there more and talk to people. A lot of people don't realize there's a state climate office. They've never been to our website, and so we're really trying to make our presence known. We think that it's really important now, given that at the federal level, the scientists there can't talk about climate change. And so we think it's really important for us at the state and the university level to use our voices where we can and for as long as we can to talk about climate change and the importance of building resilience and making our communities sustainable. A little bit about the climate impacts assessment report. I was involved in the first one in 2014, and that's why they came to me after the last state climatologist left, and they had this new report coming up, and nothing had been done on it. And so it was like, hey, Deb, you worked on this last one. Can you come work on this one? And I was like, let me read the language first, because in 2014, they first tried to do it through the governor and the state legislature. In order to get the bill passed, the wording was to study the impacts of climate change, but only those due to natural causes such as solar variation and volcanic eruptions. And then they came to the university scientists and we said, no, we're not doing it unless you let us talk about what's actually happening. And so we turned down their money and did it on our own time and produced a report that was, at the time, like, people couldn't believe that in a Republican state that we were able to accomplish something like this. So it was one of the first ones in the central US to get published. In 2022, there was a joint bill proposed by Mike Flood and Elliot Bostar to update this report, and it did pass. And I read that very carefully to make sure there wasn't anything in there that said, before I said I would help out, to make sure I wasn't going to be limited. And it wasn't. It was just to update this report, look at what's changed, what do we know now that we didn't know 10 years ago, and to report on that. That was due December 1st. Since we were on such a crunched timeline, it's still not out yet. It's huge. This last one was like 78 pages long. This new one is 360 pages long. What's different about the new one, let me see, I don't have it on there. What's different about the new one is that the last time, I think I wrote probably 75% of this myself, looking at the National Climate Assessment, and then Dr. Bob Oglesby, Dr. Clint Rowe, and Dr. Don Wilhite wrote some other parts, and then we had some short invited commentaries. This time, because of the political situation, I wanted to really focus on the science of it and to not make it seem like it was my report, but it was the university's expertise, that I wanted it to represent the voice of the state's university expertise. And so we have, I think, 15 different authors on it, writing an analysis of their sector, and I'll show what those sectors are in a little bit. So we took this different approach. This time we had it peer-reviewed, so each chapter went out, because that's what we do in science. To give it credibility, we put it out for peer review. And so each chapter went out to 2 reviewers. Some were within the university, but they weren't involved within the report. Some were from federal agencies, some were from other universities. So that was part of our process, and that made it take a little longer this time too. And then it's just a monstrous document at 300 and some pages long. Now, a lot of that's references and tables and things like that, but there's still a good amount of information in there. For this report, one of the things that we do, like the last report, we look at what's happening at the global level. NASA confirmed 2024 was the warmest year on record. The headline in 2023 was that it was the warmest year on record and shattered previous records. Now 2024 shattered those records. And it's been, I think, 44 years since we've had a temperature that's been below that long-term average. Wow. So and all of the top 10 warmest years are all within the last decade, basically. So we keep breaking new records on that. 2024 for Nebraska as a whole was our second warmest year on record, and for the US it was the third warmest year. These, I almost wore I have a climate stripes skirt that shows these different colors, and they had to come up with a new color of red for it because the temperature is so much warmer. 2024 was the first time that we passed that 1.5 degree threshold that the United Nations and the Paris Climate Accord talked about, that's when really bad things starts to happen. Last year, 2024 was the first year that we broke that. Climate change isn't something that's just for the future, it's what we're experiencing now. We see it in the storms, in all of the storms, whether it's the large tornado outbreaks like we had last spring. The science shows that we can expect not an overall increase in the number of tornadoes, but more days where we have multiple tornado events like the ones last April. The science projects that we'll have stronger, slower moving hurricanes that dump more rain, like Hurricane Helene, and I can't remember the one right after that Milton, something like that. So it's not just something for the future, it's something we're dealing with now and we have to cope with now. If we want to look at Nebraska just to see, because the global temperature, that's everything, that's the oceans and the land surface and everything averaged together in one temperature. And so if we want to look at Nebraska, we can see that we've had this warming trend in Nebraska as well, this long term since 1880. Since 1980, that rate of increase has doubled our warming in the state. We also, one of the things we did that's different from the last report is we didn't just use the national maps. We went in and did our own calculations to look at what was happening in Nebraska. And so looking at the observed trends in Nebraska, it shows us that we've had warming on an annual level. Every place in the state has experienced this warming trend, the greatest in the Panhandle. If we break it down seasonally, the most warming is happening in the past, has happened in the winter. And this is a temperature difference of the most recent 30 years compared to the decades before it. So most of that warming right now, or so far, has been in the winter, but it is happening across all seasons. And that's what this shows us. So some of you look like you've been around for a little while. How would you describe, what have you observed in your lifetime that's different about Nebraska's climate than, for me, I grew up in northeast Nebraska, and we used to go sledding every Christmas Eve. Every Christmas Eve, we would go sledding at the cemetery in town, but not on the part with the graves, but the other part. But it was a nice big hill, and we would get stuck. We got 2 4-wheel drives stuck one year, going sledding. Now, as an adult, if I go visit my family at Christmas, we're playing football or something like that because it's a nice day. What do you guys notice that's different?
A lot less snow.
A lot less snow. What else?
Even as an adult, I remember getting snow around Thanksgiving and having it melt in July or thereabouts.
It doesn't stick around, does it?
Yeah.
What about the other seasons? See, I always think that it's become wetter. To me, it seems like it's wetter in the fall, about when farmers are going in the fields, but everyone else tells me no, so I guess that's just my perception and it's wrong. So I don't know what you guys think.
It also seems like it's getting windier in the last couple of decades.
Maybe. We haven't looked at that. That's something that Eric and I talked about. The other thing that we as a climate community have talked about, that the summers seem so much more humid now than they used to.
What did he say? We couldn't hear him.
Oh, I'm sorry. He said windier in recent decades. And that's something that we haven't looked at yet because we're still trying to find the data for that.
Yeah, June used to be my favorite month for a number of reasons, and it isn't anymore because June has become July.
And you are right, that's one of the observations that the summertime warming that we do see is driven by those June temperatures. So.
I
good
have one comment.
Sure.
Probably 20 years ago, actually it wouldn't be that long, 10 years ago, Paul Johnsgaard did a survey. He went back and looked at 50 years of Christmas bird counts,
I
like 50
remember
years
that.
ago, and then in about 2016, and he found that the wintering range for the birds had moved about 100 miles north. So that shows way back then we were having warming.
And when I talk about climate change with people, I say it's not just about like the temperature and that's not the only way you think about it. You can think about it in terms of that migration range. You can think about it in terms of the ticks and the mosquito-borne diseases that we never used to have here in Nebraska, or invasive species in terms of plants. And I believe
One
you had
thing,
a question.
it wasn't just in Nebraska, but people that are growing fruit trees are having problems, especially the peaches. They bloom, and then the next thing they know, a freeze comes on. So this one orchard, 3 years in a row, now I don't know what's going to happen this year, 3 years in a row, they had no peaches because they bloomed and then the freeze came.
My garden didn't do very well last year because it was warm and we planted, and then we had that cool kind of wet period. And
I think related to peaches, I heard last year, Georgia, the peach tree state, lost 98% of its crop
wow.
because of late season freezes. They were early and late. So Texas and Georgia both had complete crop failures for peaches. So you start getting major centers of agricultural products with complete
that are getting these big swings. I know, like this year, it was so crazy that my friend in Houston had snow, and we didn't here.
More snow in Galveston, Texas than we had here in Lincoln.
Snow on the beaches.
Snow on the beaches, right?
It seems like there's less spring now. In the past, I always was noticing how neat it was, when spring came, and it seemed like it lasted longer. It didn't get so hot so soon.
And I haven't looked at the data, but I would agree with you from my
What
own
did she
personal.
say?
I'm sorry, I didn't repeat that. Thank you for pointing that out to me. She said it seems like we don't really have a spring anymore, that the spring is so much shorter now, that it used to be longer and you could kind of enjoy it and see it. And now it's kind of like that a little bit with fall too. It's like I have this big maple tree, and it's always the last one to lose its leaves, but it's not till January that it loses its leaves now. That it's like all of a sudden it gets cold and freezes and everything falls off.
And it seems like we've had, at least the last few years, particularly this year, a lot more polar vortexes in the winter.
Yes.
The winter's getting warmer overall, but we have these massive.
And that explains he said the polar vortexes, those cold air outbreaks like brought the snow. And that's something I do talk about in the report. And the theory behind that is we have the jet stream, and that is based on the temperature differences between the warm air to the south and the cold air at the poles. And the stronger that gradient, the faster the jet stream. So the jet stream's at upper level winds where the jets fly. And if that temperature gradient is weaker, those winds are slower. And as they slow down, they get these big dips in them. And that happens like when we had, was it 2022? The big cold, we've had multiple of them, but the big one that hit Texas and they were without power for days and days and days.
We're still paying for that now.
We're still paying for that, right? One more and then we'll go on to finish up and then take questions.
I actually just have a question. If you were to migrate like a bird, what part of the world would you migrate to, seeing all the information that you have as a climatologist? What would you think the migration of humanity should be?
People have looked at that, and there are places that are advertising themselves kind of in the Great Lakes region we're on the verge of that in eastern Nebraska as the climate optimal zone. So that could be the place where people come. And if you think the climate in Nebraska is optimal, then that's saying something.
Well, would it be further north into Canada then?
A little bit, yeah. So let's just move on real quick and just finish this up, and then we'll take more questions and comments. So I mentioned snow, someone else mentioned snow. This is showing us the difference in the darker color is the earlier decades, so 1951 to 80. The lighter color is 1991 to 2020. So we are showing that most sites, so Lincoln had 45 days with snow on the ground in the past. Now we average, well, this year we didn't even hit 37. I don't even think we hit double digits this year, maybe 10. But on average, over that 1991 to 2020 time period, we've had 10 fewer days of snow cover compared to the earlier decades. The most recent couple of years, it's been even lower than that. And that has huge implications for our stream flow, for our groundwater, for our crops, for all sorts of different implications for that.
And then we still have the winds all the time.
And then we still have the winds. Let me see. I couldn't remember where I was. So there's snow cover. Now this was an interesting finding if it shows up. This is the difference in the number of days per year with maximum temperatures greater than 95 degrees. So those really hot days. And what's interesting about this map, and we're not the first people to notice this, is that this eastern half of the state, we show a decrease in those really hot days, the number of really hot days. Anyone want to venture a guess as to what that might be? The more humidity from irrigated agriculture. And so that's the theory on that. How long that holds out. It doesn't show up when you look at the projections in the future. And these are temperature and precipitation records. This is a really cool graph that my colleague Eric made. So this is showing the number of, in red, the number of record warm months, and then the record cold months in light blue. So what this shows us is that across the state, we've had more record warm months. So Lincoln's had 3 record warm months since 2000, 0 record cold months. Norfolk has had 3 and 0 as well. Scottsbluff has had 3 record warm, 1 record cold. So that's what that's showing us is we've had more record warm than record cold, and I think we would all agree with that. Because when we do get these cold air outbreaks, they're usually just in February, and they last maybe, this last one was 2 weeks, that most recent one we had. I thought I was going to die because it was so cold. And then when we look at dry versus wet, and dry versus wet is the red versus the brown, or dry is the brown, and wet is the dark blue. And so here in North Platte, 4 record dry, 0 record wet months. So we've had more record dry than record wet months at these stations that we looked at. But there's no spatial pattern really to it. So, and we would kind of guess that because precipitation is pretty variable and it varies across town. And then Nebraska's future climate. This is different from the last report. We just used the output from the global models that they use in the National Climate Assessment. This time we had a professor or faculty member in the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences who's a regional climate modeler do some downscaling for us. So this is at, I think the resolution, I'd have to double check it, is maybe from 125 miles down to like 4 miles or 6 miles or something like that for the resolution from this. And when we look at for the future, so normally I would show this with like low, moderate, and high emissions. The high emissions are the business as usual. The moderate means we're going to be proactive in trying to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Well, we've kind of thrown that out the window. So we're just looking at the high scenario. And that is showing a warming of, so by mid-century, so 2050, and that's showing a warming of about 6 to 8 degrees, particularly in summer and fall, where we see that warming. If we want to look at the end of the century, it's looking more like the 14 to 16 degrees. And so it will look like, this is, Nebraska's warmest time in history was during the Dust Bowl. Our warmest extended period was during the Dust Bowl. And so this is even warmer than that. And this will be like the new normal. Will be warmer than that extreme period in Nebraska of the Dust Bowl years. And this will put average temperatures about in line with Oklahoma, if you want to think of it in terms of location. So we're skipping right over Kansas and going straight to Oklahoma. So if you think of their temperature averages and kind of what their growing degree days and things like that, we'd be shifting up another state for that. The report has so much more than just that little snippet that I showed you. And this is really, really small. And I hate it when people say that. It's like, why are you showing it then if it's really small? But this is from Mark's website where he put it up, where I gave it to him. So I have to tell him to make it bigger. But the chapters we have are the global and national context, and then the state work that Eric did, and then the projections that I just showed. There's more of them other than just a couple graphs I showed you. And then we have faculty members looking at Nebraska's water systems and what those impacts might be, Nebraska's energy and what that might be, the ecosystems, the agriculture, the communities in the built environment. The folks from the Med Center talked about impacts to human health with climate change from those vector-borne diseases and maybe increased wildfire and increased smoke, like the smoke we had the other night. We have a chapter on indigenous peoples and what climate change looks like. And they talk a little bit about the flooding in 2019 that affected Niobrara, but also affected the Santee Reservation. And there are places there that, I don't know if they still have clean drinking water. I don't remember from that. I don't think they do. And then climate justice and equity, which are two more words that you can't say anymore, but we talk about them in our report. And the faculty member from Creighton wrote that, and he did some analysis with looking at the energy assistance programs and where those payments are going to versus who needs the money and how that might change with climate change. The tool that he was using to get that information from, actually I just sent him a text message over the weekend saying, did you see they shut that whole office down? They had fired everyone in that office, in that program. But fortunately, he had downloaded all the data, so he can still do the analysis. So, and then we had the response of faith communities, and there's a survey that went out to faith leaders across the state to find out what congregations and what faith leaders and how they're talking about climate change. The answer is not a lot, but there are some example congregations that have done some good things in terms of installing solar panels and increasing sustainability and resilience. But unfortunately, a lot of the programs that are mentioned in there aren't currently active either. So that's part of the problem with the report being delayed, is now a lot of these programs aren't available. But I guess even if it wasn't delayed, they still wouldn't be available. So, and then we have in the report, we have these risk assessments up here that we created, and the impacts for each of these sectors. We have a risk assessment that we did in conjunction with the experts, so the climatologists and then the sector experts, and looking at the climate models, and where you are and what the probability is. And these are general, they're for the state as a whole, so they'll vary by region. But to give decision makers and planners, you only have so many resources, where do you want to put them? To give an idea for that. And then we also, a really cool part of it is that the report has, I can't remember how many pages, but we looked at climate action plans and adaptation plans for all 50 states, plus Puerto Rico, plus plans within Nebraska as well, to come up with strategies, and this was with a consulting firm we worked with, to come up with strategies for each of those sectors that could be recommended strategies, because we're not telling anyone what to do. Recommended strategies for at the state level, at the government, or like community level, or even at the individual or organizational level. So multiple strategies, multiple options for all of those chapters that you saw in there.
Who gets that information?
Well, it will go to the state. Right now it's being copy edited. It'll go to the state. This is the part that your son is doing for me, is he's taking all like 40, 50 pages of this and making it into a searchable database for me online. And so we will have all of this information on the State Climate Office website. We realize that nobody's going to read a 360-page document, so we'll have it where you can pull out the sections that you want. And then we're also sending out some surveys, and you can let me know if there's information that you think would be useful. One of the things we're looking at is creating like 2 pages for the NRDs to say, this is what's happened in your natural resource. These are the impacts you can expect, and this is what's projected in the future. And, kind of having these summaries for different areas of the state. And we've got case studies in there as well. So all of this will be on our website. It's in copy editing right now, probably for another 3 weeks, and then it has to go through the layout. So June, maybe? I'm just guessing. It depends on how bad all of our writing it is and how long it takes the copy editor to go through it. Like academic writing isn't always the easiest thing to read. But we have 150 figures, and so we have to work all that into the text too. So, and I think I'm gonna just one last thing, and then I'll take questions. So these climate assessments, Nebraska last did one in 2014. We have our one now in 2025. They happen at the national level a little more frequently. They're legislatively mandated for every 5 years. There's probably going to be a pause in that. I just saw and these international ones, they have like over 100 countries that are involved in writing those, and they provide the data and the information that go into the international agreements. The National Climate Assessment, that has been canceled, so that might not happen. The next one that's scheduled to be in 2028. In terms of Nebraska's, who knows? We don't know. Nebraska's is supposed to feed into that big $307 million grant. They didn't give us money for it, but it's supposed to provide information for that. For now, that grant is still on, but we don't know. You can look at their website for updates on that. And then that's all I have. I'm sorry, I went long because I
that's
asked
fine.
people for stories.
No,
So.
well, thank you very much. Let's give her a hand. Now we'll do some questions.
I'm gonna take a drink of
Ann had her
water.
hand up, so we'll start here. So raise your hand for questions so I can bring the mic around so people at home can hear the questions.
She's got one
Here's
right
one
here.
right here.
Yep, we're starting back here first.
Yeah,
and
she
then
was.
we'll come up.
I forgot you had your hand raised up.
That's all right. I've got a couple, actually. So the state of Nebraska has a committee for climate change?
No, it's basically for drought.
So where does it go when you send it to the state?
Just goes to the state legislators.
No specific,
Nope, I have to file it with the clerk of the legislature.
okay. Years ago, we used
Well,
to.
I don't, the president's office does. The university president's office
Okay.
does.
Years ago, my dad lived in Glenwood, Iowa.
Okay.
And we would go over to Glenwood. And in the spring, the geese and the waterfowl and stuff, when we were crossing the Missouri River, there were just thousands and thousands and thousands. Do you know where they go now, where they're?
You all are the bird people. I don't know. Is it earlier in the year? I don't know anything about their.
No, they just don't go through there like they used to. They're going somewhere else.
Does anyone know that?
They've moved west. They're more in the Central Platte area now,
With
The snow
sandhill-
geese.
With the sandhill cranes?
but they come sooner. They come
Yeah,
before the
okay.
sandhills.
All right.
Is anyone looking at the impact of climate migration from movement within our country?
People?
Yes.
I have a couple of mentions of that from the hurricanes. Hurricane Katrina, most of the hurricanes, we've had some migrants end up in Nebraska afterwards. Katrina was a big one that was studied. There are a few others. It's kind of hard to get the data for that. They have to look at where people apply for aid from, and they look at changes to mailing addresses filed and things. So it's really hard to get data for
In
that.
relation to temperature change, you would anticipate people.
But it's so far been more based on big events that happen, at least that we know.
So you mentioned that in the recent trend has been that the winters are warming faster than the summers, but the projection for the future was that the summers and the fall are going to be warming faster than the winter. So why that change?
I don't know. I was trying to think about that, and it may have to do with kind of like the cold air outbreaks, more heat waves. So that's the best answer I can give you on that for now.
Lots of predicted change, daytime temps tends to be what we focus on, but nighttime temps are a serious risk for human health and plant health.
And animal health, for
And
if you think of
the
Nebraska,
livestock.
the livestock,
Mhm,
exactly.
livestock. And so I'm assuming that, that last slide you showed of the end of the century
It's
Nebraska of 14 or 16 degrees, and at nighttime temps, without the power, without air conditioning, it starts to look unlivable in some places. Just what's your comment about just that impact of daytime, nighttime shifting in temperature?
I think the nighttime is almost scarier than the daytime, because plants, animals, humans need that recovery period from it, and I think that is what's frightening. And then you end up with this cycle of we have more air conditioning, then there's more emissions, and so unless we do something about it, but the current policy now is, well, first it was attack the models. And the models have, I'll show it really quick here. But computer models have been accurately predicting climate change for at least 50 years. Even ExxonMobil accurately predicted it in the 70s and in the 80s. So they've been doing it for 50 years. So they attack the models. These are the models today. They're even better than that. They just upgraded the modeling system, the supercomputers. Then they attack the scientists and say there's not agreement, that it's 50-50. In 2014, it was 97 out of 100 people. Now it's 99.7 when they do the different studies. Then they say that it's the different ways that we measure temperature. And that's what the disagreement looks like. It's still there. And then now it's attacking, well, now it's if we don't measure it, then it's not happening, right? If you don't measure it, it's not happening. So this is everything from the weather balloons that we use on a short-term scale. And if you heard any news in the last couple of weeks, you heard talk about the weather balloons. You may have heard me, you may have heard Eric, you may have heard my husband, you may have heard like all of us on campus that have a weather climate background did those interviews. Fortunately, Mike Flood did go, I think it was Flood that went to the Weather Service office to talk more about so at least he came back. He came back and he recognized it and he talked about it. But it's not just in terms of, like this time of year, it's extremely important because of severe weather, or we could get snow or ice, anything goes this time of year. But it's also in terms of, we're seeing changes in the jet stream, and we've worked so long and so hard to get these long-term records so we could study this change, and any break in the record messes up our ability to study and to understand that. And so it's important from the longer term too. So I'm sorry, I went off on my little
Yeah, I have a question.
spiel.
So in January, a Senator Spivey from Omaha submitted a potential bill for there to be a new state-level department created to
Yes.
coordinate response to climate.
Yes, and I think that was to, I'm not really sure, it was to, I think it's to coordinate that $307 million grant.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if there'd been any coordination between her or any other legislators and your work?
No,
or-
they didn't talk to us about
Okay.
it at all.
Do you envision such a, I mean, I don't.
I would
I
hope
don't-
so.
I don't see Nebraska funding anything new.
No, and
But-
it was just to get it to the goal was to just introduce it
Uh-huh.
this year and then have more discussion on it next year. The same with the Mesonet funding, to introduce it and then
Well,
to have more
Me-
discussion on it next year.
Mesonet's receiving full support right now.
Is it? Okay, I haven't heard, I
Yeah,
haven't
it's
talked.
passed too.
Has it? That's
Yeah.
good. I haven't caught up with Ruben, so.
Yeah, no, it was like 41-0 or something like that on the vote, so it's in there. Yeah.
See, you learn something new wherever you go.
Question over here.
So I have a bad back, that's why I'm sitting down. I can't stand very long.
The numbers you showed for the projections on temperature increases for the next 75 years, truly alarming. With all of the solar farms and the wind farms that are out there, is there anything in the data that suggests that these things are helping at all?
We were starting to get some leveling off on it, but I don't see that continuing just because of the policies now. And if you think about it, we're producing more energy, but with increases in AI and the more data, that's going to require more energy. And increased cooling, that's going to require more energy. And so with the current policy of drill, baby, drill,
There were some people that said when the electricity was off for a week and they had this other energy, excuse me, that they didn't have to worry about their freezers, you know,
Why?
because they had energy.
oh.
I didn't have
I thought you said the electricity was off.
Pardon me?
Where did they get the energy? From the solar?
I
They were-
haven't been,
they were
mine
doing
flickered.
solar-
I'm
Sorry,
lucky.
I didn't say that.
I'm going to say the word wrong. I don't quite. Desertification
Oh, does,
with
yes.
moving west to east. Does your data help me understand that better?
We have not looked at that specifically, but there are researchers looking at that. They talk about the movement east of the 100 meridian, basically showing that we're getting drier. Well, our data show for Nebraska that we looked at, and I didn't show any precipitation data, is that overall, Nebraska's got a slight wetting trend, but it's not just the trend. If you look at the data, it's increased variability. So we think about it in terms of climate whiplash or flip-flops, where we have like 2011 when we had
2019 floods and then
exactly. I always think 2011 because my son was born in 2012, and in 2011 the flooding was so bad we had to go to Kansas City to see a specialist, and we couldn't get across the river.
Yeah.
And then in 2012 it was like the worst drought, spatial extended drought. So
I lived a long time in Texas, and I feel like Texas weather is coming to Nebraska. I used to say it was long periods of drought punctuated by tornadoes and flooding, and it seems similar now, more similar than I care to recall. But there was a really good webinar for anyone that might be interested, and it was a Minnesota, I think it may have been through their extension service, but it was really talking about ecosystem shifts. And it was really well done on how prairie ecosystems may be taking over. There may not be evergreens much by the end of the century, naturally growing and regenerating in northern Minnesota. So it really, I don't know what something like that would look like in Nebraska, because it is this variability versus trend.
Right, and
They have far more trending than we have, I think, than.
And Nebraska's ecosystems look completely different in the west versus the east. And they talk about it a little bit in our ecosystems chapter, but they're federal employees that wrote our ecosystem chapter. Unfortunately, they got it approved, so it can still show up in there, but it doesn't go quite into that level of detail. Minnesota's really gone all in on their climate extension. A few years ago, they hired like 31 extension folks for climate change. So they have good information, but I can look for that, and if anyone wants, I can send it out to you or put it up on our website. I can contact their state climatologist there. He'll know where it is. So I'm assuming we need to wrap up, but
Well, I
you
tell you
can,
what, I've got 2 quick announcements that I need to
Okay.
make, and then we'll I'm sure you'll stick around and answer a few
I
more
will.
questions for folks. First, I wanted to thank, we've got a couple of celebrities in the room. I wanted to thank, I almost said Congressman, so I've given you an upgrade. City Councilman Benny Shoby. He's been a friend of conservation. He's attending tonight. He's worked on the heat pump rebate with Senator Ken Har, and he was the one that really pushed that hard the last couple times, so we appreciate that hard work. And the other person is Ron Klataski, who's done a lot for Wachiska Audubon. And I'm going to let Arliss say a few words about Ron, because she worked with him for a long time. And so Ron joined us from Kansas tonight. So Arliss.
Yeah, last month when they had the reception for my retirement, I had a few things I was going to say, and I didn't get a chance because the program went so long. But one of the things I certainly would have said, and he wasn't here then, but he happens to be here tonight from Manhattan, Kansas, is Ron Klataski, who was the vice president or senior vice president, I don't remember, of National Audubon at the time that we were formed in 1973. He was at every meeting. He's the one, we talk about Betsy and Walt as having started our chapter, but Ron was the organizer. He's the one that got it going. He was here for every meeting. You'd have thought he lived in Omaha or Lincoln, and he came from Manhattan all that time, to the point where one time Ken said, Ron, you're missing a hubcap on the back of your car. And Ron says, he says, I've been losing so many hubcaps, I don't have time to replace those. And his territory was from North Dakota to Oklahoma. And he traveled all that with all these chapters that he was starting. That's how we got started, and he's here tonight. And I just want everybody to know that there is a real person. He's one of a couple of people that have been the most influential in my life as far as work anyway. And so here's Ron Klataski.
Ron, I don't know if you want to say anything, but we are very glad that you made it. You were up today for the conference, the Great Plains Conference, and you joined us tonight, so thank you.
Well, when she retired, but actually when you represented your 50th celebration for the chapter, I wanted to bring, since it was an anniversary kind of event, I wanted to bring a bouquet of flowers to Arliss, because she really deserved them. But I wasn't able to do that, and I should. I'll keep working on that, Arliss. But this chapter's had so many marvelous leaders and so many involved people that it's incredible, and it does so many things, and it's wonderful to see the strides that have been made, and to see Walter Bagley's land now become under the stewardship of the chapter. I think that's wonderful. Audubon has done, I've always thought of it as one of the leading chapters in the West Central region that I represented because of the leadership, and it kept it going. One time it got down to where it looked like it was going to fall apart, but then people stepped up, and it's been going gangbusters ever since. I thank you all for that.
Thank you, Ron. Well, with that, we'll conclude for tonight, but I'm sure Dr. Bathke would stick around and answer a few more questions. We've got cookies and some water out here, so be sure and join us for a few minutes afterwards. Thanks for coming tonight.